All right, folks, it is still July of 2024, and it is that time of year again, the parade of reports that we get, that we've gotten over the years, where some sort of survey or audit or some sort of investigation into the DIB trying to figure out what cybersecurity stuff is happening or not happening in defense contractor environments. We get one of these every year. We started off this whole saga way back in 2019 with the DoD IG report that led to the creation of the CMMC program. There were reports from companies like Sarah Brin in 2019 and 2020. There was a report from GAO in 2021. There was an analysis from Merrill Research in 2022. There was a follow-up from the DoDIG in 2023. There's the ongoing DIBCAC top 10 findings from their assessments in the DIB over the last several years. And all of these reports over the years have led to the same conclusion. Companies are not implementing their cybersecurity requirements. Surprise, surprise. And now here we are in 2024, and we have another entry into this long line of reports from MXD. And for those of you not familiar, MXD is the National Center for Cybersecurity in Manufacturing by the Department of Defense. So this one is not, there's some companies that were involved in a research report just in general. This was specifically asking companies who are in the DIB doing DIB work on DoD weapon systems. They surveyed 750 manufacturers across multiple sectors, including the DIB, including aerospace, defense, DIB contractors. And the very interesting thing about this report, this is not just a laundry list of like, they do MFA, they don't do MFA. They do network segmentation, they don't do network segmentation. The interesting thing about this is that MXD actually did some analysis on the responses and came up with a very interesting takeaway. Companies were asked about their confidence in their cybersecurity, and they were asked about specific cybersecurity behaviors that they employ, and MXD discovered that there was a gigantic gap. So companies rate themselves as being very confident in their cybersecurity posture, and then when they are asked specific questions about cybersecurity practices that would lead to that level of confidence, those practices seem to be missing in action. So we're going to talk about their findings and their takeaways today.
So much like with these reports, I wake up every single day and I'm like, is it going to be 100 degrees? Will there not be any rain? Is my grass going to die even further? Maybe today's the day that it rains. Maybe today's the day it rains on these reports and they start raining positive information. But it looks like what we see is a constant retread of the same story that we get time in and time out. The difference is in this report is that we get more in-depth, I don't want to say analysis into this is exactly why you're failing, but more in depth into where the buy-in is, where they think the responsibility lies. And this is especially important in a scenario where it's manufacturers kind of are focused here, because manufacturing has always been the one area of the industry that we were like, listen, cybersecurity is going to be a challenge for these people. It was never a challenge before. These people turn wrenches, run machines, things like that. They don't configure access and manage identities.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought that a highly specialized manufacturing operation with 25 employees doesn't employ a team of cloud security architects? What are you talking about?
Who would have thought that an industry that is compiled of specialized knowledge would not just automatically be able to drop and pick up an entire other industry of specialized knowledge in order to maintain their contracts? I wonder how they could make it work.
However, insofar as data flow enters into those environments, just because they don't have the team or the resources or the know-how does not mean that the requirements go away. Hence the pickle that we all find ourselves in with the saga of CMMC. So check out this excerpt from the report before we get started here. I mean, this is really the core of the report. Everyone should read it. It's relatively long, but it's an easy read. We definitely won't have enough time to get into the multiple chapters of the report. I mean, they talk about trends on projections for increasing budgets, increasing workforce, details on constraints preventing people from doing cybersecurity. There's a ton of good information. Everyone should read this report. It's very, very good. But here's the part that really jumps out. From the discussion section, they say the survey results present a clear directive for manufacturing decision makers. There is a pressing need to strengthen cybersecurity measures across the board. The reported confidence in cybersecurity capabilities, particularly among small manufacturers, juxtaposes with the demonstrable gaps in leadership, comprehensive policies, and the frequency of training and assessments. The misalignment suggests an area ripe for enhancement where decision makers must recognize the value of strategic cybersecurity investments, not only as a defensive measure, but also as an enabler of operational continuity and competitive advantage. The core of this report is that they asked companies, how confident are you? And then when they asked them the specific things that they do that would provide that confidence, they aren't doing them, which means companies are really, really overconfident in how they respond to vendor surveys, supplier questionnaires, self-attested compliance with requirements, as if we needed more evidence to show self-attestation doesn't work. This report is probably the best one that's ever come out that explains the difference between the perception of cybersecurity and the actual things that they're not doing that would lead to their levels of confidence.
So one thing from that discussion, that excerpt that you just read off, that really stands out to me, that is kind of like, hey, pointing out the obvious. This misalignment suggests an area ripe for enhancement. Let's translate that real quick. There is a lot of room for improvement here, right? This area right here demonstrates that there's a demonstrated need for massive improvement here. But that's the story across the DIB, right?
Yeah. And remember, this is the organization sponsored by the DoD to analyze cybersecurity in the manufacturing base for their contractors. So when they say it's an area ripe for improvement, read between the lines. This is why CMMC is a thing. I mean, this is exactly why.
And having deficiencies in these areas isn't good, but especially in the areas where, I don't know, the produce things are like missile parts, airplane fins, like things like that, right? Weapon control systems. You would think that this would be the area that it would be the main focus on, those critical and high value assets that we speak about all the time. Instead, it's like, well, maybe the focus is there, right? Maybe the focus is fully there because they're reporting that they're doing things are real good over here, right? And they're like, oh, thanks, guys.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this as we get into here, but there's a conundrum here that it's basically a lose-lose or a win-win, depending on your perspective. If the numbers in these types of reports are consistently bad, then you have to have CMMC to go in and verify that the things are being implemented. Absolutely. If the numbers in these reports are consistently good, then it tends towards overconfidence, and you need CMMC to go in and verify that these numbers are actually accurate. So it doesn't really matter if everybody on, let's say, I don't know, your SPRS self-assessment score inputs perfect 110 scores, gets a little suspicious. If everybody inputs a negative 20, that's not good either. And so there really is no set of answers in which something like an external verification program such as CMMC won't be the logical endpoint from this analysis. Okay, a couple things. So this report is very good because it is hyper specific on pulling out information for companies in the DIB doing DoD contract work directly. However, they kind of split hairs between DIB companies and aerospace and defense companies. They do provide a definition of what that means, and we'll talk about the numbers for both of them. I think it's a little arbitrary, but I mean, I'm definitely not complaining because a lot of reports on manufacturing cybersecurity don't even talk about that level of granularity. So in the report, they say that for both the DIB and aerospace and defense, that's the industry classification that represents the principal activity of the company is DIB work, defense work, aerospace work. For DIB companies in the report, their primary business activity is developing, integrating military comms, electronics, cybersecurity systems, or manufacturing military aircraft, vehicles, weapons, or related components, or providing maintenance, repair, or overhaul services for military equipment. Basically, a huge swath of companies that are going to be dealing with CUI, dealing with DoD type work, dealing with weapon systems directly, or the integration of components on those systems. In contrast, a little bit, aerospace and defense are companies whose primary activity is either developing space technologies or components for civilian aerospace. I think there's a lot of overlap in these two companies, and they don't necessarily explain that in the report, but we can go through because they give the numbers for both, so we can compare and contrast them as we go. But just realize that they do call out companies in this report that specifically identify we are a DIB contractor, and that's the reason that we're talking about it. Okay, so they surveyed 750 companies in total. There were a couple of other sectors in that group. There was chemical sector companies, other manufacturing sectors, but they have some great data here on the aerospace and defense and the DIB companies that they talked to. So in total, they talked to 106 aerospace and defense companies and 102 DIB companies. 76 of the companies that are aerospace and defense were small. 72 of the DIB companies were small. So the majority of the companies in both categories are small manufacturers rather than large manufacturers, meaning they have fewer than 500 employees or more than 500 employees for large manufacturers. And there's several times throughout the report where they specifically call out the numbers for companies that are fewer than 100 employees. So they actually do get down to a level of granularity that you rarely see in this type of analysis. Okay. So let's read together, everyone, this one section of the report, exploring overconfidence in cybersecurity preparedness. This is really where MXD does an amazing job of extracting insights from their data rather than just reporting the raw numbers. So they say, among manufacturers who are highly confident in their organization's cybersecurity preparedness, spoiler alert, that's 81% of DIB companies that were surveyed are highly confident in their organization's cybersecurity preparedness. Fewer than half are engaging in 6 of the 10 key drivers for confidence, which we'll explain in a little bit. For example, only 9% of confident manufacturers are mandating quarterly cybersecurity trainings, and only 3 in 10 have fully integrated cyber risks into their business continuity and disaster recovery plans. The overconfidence in cybersecurity preparedness is even more pronounced when we look at the data by manufacturer size and sector. Even though 70% of small manufacturers and 65% of manufacturers are highly confident in their cybersecurity preparedness, they have below average rates of behavior adoption for almost all key behaviors identified, right? This is across sectors. This means that people are rating themselves 70%, 80% of respondents. Yes, we are very confident in our cybersecurity, and almost all of them are doing almost none of the things that would lead to that level of confidence.
So, hold on, dude. So, they're saying they're doing really good, or they're really, really good at something, and then when you say "show me," they go to do it, and then it's not very good. So, like when my kid,
this is the how far do you hit your driver, and your buddy goes, I don't know, 350, and you're like, there's no way, man. There's no way that you pipe these things 350 yards, and sure enough, you get out there on the tee box and you top it 45 yards, right? We've all been there. We've all been there, right? But that's what's happening here. Companies are saying, I absolutely laser that ball 350 yards. And then you're like, let me see your swing. And you're like, there's no way.
I was hitting them out of the driving range. I was on the range. Everything was going straight. I was hitting them out there. And then you get out there and it's a 110 type of day.
Just a bad day. Just a bad day. Yeah, but apparently, but it's systemic. But it's systemic across these sectors. So they keep going in this section. Each manufacturing sector has a behavior in which they are at least 10 points below the average. These behaviors are identified as potential areas for standardization in the industry. What do you know? The aerospace and defense and DIB manufacturers demonstrate specific risks, with only 23% of the confident aerospace and defense manufacturers actively monitoring cybersecurity regulations, and a mere 30% of DIB manufacturers having extensive cybersecurity requirements for their vendors. for their vendors. Everybody want to know why 171 Rev 3 has a new emphasis on supply chain security? Because only 30% of companies in the DIB are doing anything to think about the cybersecurity for the vendors that they use.
We hope that you learn how to do your chores, and if you're not going to do your chores, then we're going to make them mandatory, and we're going to check behind you to make sure that you're doing it. I've been saying it for 2 years. The craziest part, I was trying to spin some positive out of this as you were going through the stats, right? And I was like, well, it's only 10 points, which is a lot better than when we got the DIB CAC results, and there was a 100-point swing in variance in those, right? But then it said at least 10 points or below per, what was it? Each sector has a behavior in which they are. So
Yeah.
there could be multiple behaviors, which means...
And these are self-reported, right? These are not DIBCAC.
But they're super confident in the, like...
Yeah, they're like, hey man, do you get 8 hours of sleep every night? And you're like, no. Be like, do you eat a well-balanced diet? Like, no. Be like, do you regularly mobilize and stretch and do your overall stuff to get ready for athletic endeavors? Like, no. They're like, have you do you sit all day? And like, oh yeah. And they're like, okay, cool. You want to go run a marathon? And you're like, yeah. 4 hours, bro.
Ready to go. Yeah.
That's there's a tremendous amount of overconfidence here. So just to wrap up this section, they say the data show a clear gap between perceived and actual cybersecurity readiness. This calls for a critical reassessment of cyber defenses across the manufacturing sector, especially for those in high-risk areas like the aerospace and defense and DIB sectors. As it stands, a sense of overconfidence could be masking underlying vulnerabilities. You think? It's crucial that the industry recalibrates its security practices to more accurately reflect the dynamic and evolving nature of cyber threats. I wonder how we might encourage that type of transformation. Anybody have any guesses about what the DoD might be cooking up?
Maybe a report, maybe a new version of CMMC.
Maybe a regulation that says you must do these things and you must have us come verify that you've actually done these things, because every single time we get self-attestations, no matter who's doing the analysis, private sector organizations, public-private organizations, the government itself, the same results come up over and over and over again for years and years and years.
So it says it's crucial that the industry recalibrates its security practices to more accurately reflect the dynamic and evolving nature of cyber threats. Didn't we just talk about how the what is it, the Attorney General, or is it Inspector? The report has to go on. I sound like Joe Biden right now. That's
we'll leave it in. We'll leave it in.
We'll leave it in. But yeah. But you know what I'm saying? We just were talking about the report, right? The report that they want to go forward, and one of the key elements of the report is that they want to see how CMMC intends to evolve with threats, right? Yeah. So isn't this another thing of saying that it's crucial, and then that we have a report right here that says that it's showing that they're not evolving with threats, and then the response from the DoD. It's the predecessor, right? That is what happens after you come out and say this industry is not prepared for this. All of a sudden, people start poking into things to see how prepared you are or how well you're implementing, right?
This is exactly what we said for years, was if after the DoD IG report came out and the Armed Services Committees got super pissed and they put language into the NDAA that said make a framework to hold these companies accountable, and then they started waving CMMC in people's faces. If then we saw an organic level of improvement across the DIB for cybersecurity without having to do the audits, then the case for needing CMMC starts to kind of go away a little bit because it's improving on its own. We have not seen that trend. We've seen the numbers stay exactly the same since 2019, if not earlier. And it doesn't matter who's doing the analysis. It's the same conclusions over and over again. And so, yeah, to your point, it's just another one of these examples. We seem to get these every year of if you don't go out and verify with external teams that people are doing it, then there is no catalyst for these things to change on their own. You can just have report after report after report diagnosing the problem over and over again. This one just has a little bit of a different perspective on the disparity between confidence and actual implementation. So let's talk about these key drivers of confidence that they pulled out from talking to all these companies. Almost 750 companies. It's quite a few. So they say our examination of the behaviors that bolster manufacturers' confidence in their cybersecurity preparedness has identified several key practices. We have ranked these behaviors by their impact on respondents' confidence levels. The findings reveal that comprehensive approaches to cybersecurity policy, training, integrating cyber risk into the larger business strategy, and staying up to date on regulations are significantly correlated with higher confidence in a company's cybersecurity posture. So they said, hey, all of you companies, who's confident in their cybersecurity? And everybody goes, we are. And they go, what kinds of things make you confident? And they go, these things. And they say, okay, cool. Then they go back to the other companies and they say, hey, you said you were super confident. Are you doing this? They said, no. Are you doing this? They said, no. Are you doing this? They said, no. And they go, okay, so help me out here. You said you're very confident. And all 750 people said, these are the things that make us confident. But when we asked you individually, you're not really doing those things. So why are you so confident? Right. And that's the problem, is that if we rely on a system of self-attestation, vendor questionnaires, supplier questionnaires, you're not going to get an accurate picture of what's going on in your supply chain, for whether it's your CUI data, whether it's your privileged access agreement. Doesn't matter what kind of vendor you're using. It's just not a reliable way of having any assurance. So
is this a matter of, and we talked about this in the pre-show, we all know the viral meme about the guy that's on, going to court, and he's on his phone going to court, and he's driving. He's like, hold on, judge, let me pull over. And the judge is like, sir, you're in here for driving on a suspended where you drive. And then he picks his hands up and he's like, oh no. It's kind of like that, right? Where they're like, yeah, we're going to tell them that we got policies, that we're executing training, that we manage access and verify identities and all of those things. And then when they ask us to prove it, we're like,
yeah,
hands up, like hands off the wheel. Wasn't driving, not us. Sir, I don't know where you got that written statement that has my name on it, but
yeah. So let's look at these. Let's look at these key behaviors that lead to respondent confidence in this survey. So they have 10 of them. They have at least moderately comprehensive, formal, documented cybersecurity policy. Glad those aren't NFOs in 171 Rev 2. Am I right? Mandatory cybersecurity training conducted at least quarterly. At least a moderately comprehensive incident response plan. All employees are required to complete cybersecurity training. Comprehensive cybersecurity requirements are in vendor and supplier contracts. System security plans are in place for all critical systems and environments. Organizations monitor for new and updated cybersecurity laws and regulations. Cyber risks are largely or fully integrated into business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Reviewing and updating cybersecurity controls at least quarterly. And cybersecurity training simulations or tabletop exercises are conducted at least annually. For companies that expressed high amounts of confidence, when they dug into the details, they said, these are the things that give us confidence in our cybersecurity. So you go back to other companies that said, we're very confident, and you go, do you do these things? And then you can see if there's a gap. If everyone's doing these things, then it probably means that they have a basis for their confidence. If they're not doing those things, then there might not be a basis for their confidence levels. So there's some convenient tables that they provide, as well as some really juicy details on individual question responses. But the number one thing that companies said that gives them confidence is at least moderately comprehensive, formal, documented cybersecurity policy, which makes total sense. And all manufacturers, all 750 respondents, said that 77% of them said that they had this, but only 69% of DIB companies said that they had this. So there's a big gap between the number of companies in the DIB that express confidence, but that are missing the amount of cybersecurity policy. And it gets pretty crazy as we get down the list here. So mandatory cybersecurity training conducted at least quarterly. Only 24% of the DIB said that they were doing this. That has been a requirement in NIST SP 800-171 pursuant to DFAR 7012 for like almost a decade, or over a decade at this point. Just basic cybersecurity training. Now they have it here as at least quarterly, which is a very nice way of defining a organizationally defined parameter for us. But 1 in 4 companies in the DIB are doing that level of training. Probably not something that DoD is going to be all that stoked about.
2% of small businesses, 2% are confident.
Yeah, so they also have the numbers here. So they divide it up by sector, but then they also divide it up by size. So they have large and small companies. So when you get into the data for small companies for mandatory cybersecurity training conducted at least quarterly, only 2% of small companies. And that's a big theme throughout the report. Humongous drop off from large to small companies. I mean, absolutely massive drop off. Putting requirements in contracts, doing consistent training, monitoring the updated regulations, basically every one of these things that companies should be doing. As soon as you drop off to a certain size, it just stops happening.
Do you think it's because it's, and I don't want to dwell just too much on the number two right here, but do you think it's just because of the frequency that's defined in here? Because I don't know a lot of
It could
organizations that
be.
do it quarterly, and the people are like taking it to the T. Because the reason why, when we get to number 10, I'll talk about it more. But
It could be. It could be that they're doing the training, but they're not doing it quarterly.
yep,
But it's also one of those things where it's like you do your annual cybersecurity training, but you're
maybe
also a
monthly
company who's
refreshers. Yep.
you're also a company that's primary purpose is putting sensitive information into the real world onto real life weapon systems. So maybe do it
Mm-hmm.
quarterly. You know what I'm saying? So down the list here, for at least moderately comprehensive incident response plan, 72% of DIB companies say that they have at least a moderately comprehensive incident response plan. That's great. That's a wonderful thing to have. I like to see those numbers. All employees are required to complete cybersecurity training. Only 52% of DIB companies require all employees to complete the training. And the numbers get worse later on in the report as they break out which employees in the company have to do the training. The one that jumped out to me was only 34% of executive leadership has to do their cybersecurity training. And I have a feeling that executive leadership were the ones giving the answers on their confidence level, but you're not doing your training. Little bit of a disparity here, everybody. Okay, at least moderately comprehensive incident response plan. All employees required to complete cybersecurity training. Number 5, comprehensive cybersecurity requirements in vendor and supplier contracts. Only 30% of DIB companies rated themselves as doing this. That's a humongous problem because that means that DFARS is not flowing down when the data is flowing down. The people that the companies in the DIB are working with as their vendors aren't getting cybersecurity requirements in their contracts. Big problem. Big problem. Okay, this one is pretty crazy. System security plans in place for all critical IT systems and environments. Only 36% of the DIB. You can't have an SPRS score uploaded into the system if you don't have an SSP. You can't get a CMMC assessment if you don't have an SSP. Nothing will happen if you don't have an SSP. So even though this isn't rated as the number one thing that gives people confidence in their cybersecurity, understandably so, the fact that only 36% of DIB companies even have one at all is a humongous flashing red light to DoD, right? People aren't doing the things that they're required to do in order to provide assurance to their customers that they're doing those things. And the SSP is where that all starts and ends.
And so this isn't a discrepancy where they're asking little Joey in the mailroom, does your company have an SSP, just as a spot check. The answers given to the survey are coming from people that are responsible for answering for this at that level, right? At the
Yeah.
executive level. If you think about it more in depth, it would be the people for these manufacturers that are responsible for doing the yearly attestations of their score in the SPRS when CMMC goes live, right?
Yeah. And even on the SSP thing for small manufacturers, 39%. Less than half of the companies that represent the DIB and less than half of the companies that are small have an SSP at all. But I'll bet you that there are a bunch of SPRS scores in the database, which you can't have if you don't have the SSP. We did our episode on assessment feasibility and CMMC false starts. You're not going to get an assessment if you don't have that SSP document. You're just not going to have it. What's funny about this is that 30% really historically has been the percentage for implementing specific controls throughout all of these reports since 2019. It's usually right around 30 to 35%, sometimes a little lower, sometimes a little bit higher, but it's always less than half. And it's been less than half for like over a decade. I don't know. Is there going to be a forcing function here? Or are we just going to be like, companies should be encouraged to do these things?
Wasn't
Okay.
it? It was at 22%. Like was the site or was the organizational wide adoption when we got the DIBCAC report? I think that's
Yeah.
the number that
Yeah.
sticks
It's
out in
usually
my head.
somewhere between 20 and 20 to 30-ish%. But we're not talking like one report says 10, one report says 90, all the reports say 75% or more. It's always a very low number. It's always a small
78%
number.
is a huge gap to fill with a role that's going final.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That's a really good point. So, wrapping up here on their list, organizations monitor for new or updated cybersecurity laws and regulations closely. Only 40% of the DIB do that. Only 28% of small organizations do that. So, if only there were a convenient and humorous weekly podcast that would keep you up to date with uh, new or updated cybersecurity laws and regulations that would allow you to follow on closely. Make sure to like and subscribe, everybody, because the numbers don't look great. Moving on here for the last few, cybersecurity risks are fully integrated into business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Only 41%. Only 41%. When DoD looks at this report and they go, okay, CUI is going to flow into the DIB, they can't even flip a coin to know if cybersecurity risks are integrated into the disaster recovery plans of their supply chain because it's less than 50% of companies that do that. I mean, I wouldn't feel very good if I was like, my sensitive data is going into this nebulous supply chain. I'm going to flip a coin as to whether they've thought about it or not. Your odds of that happening are less than a coin flip, which probably isn't going to give the DoD very much assurance. Okay, number 9 here, review and update cybersecurity controls. For instance, firewall rules, access controls, at least quarterly. Only 58% of the DIB are doing this. Now, it's higher than average for the overall responded score because there's other sectors that are responding here. But you have to imagine that if you're DoD and only 58% of the DIB and only 41% of small companies say that they're reviewing cybersecurity controls on at least a quarterly basis, but then 80% of companies tell you we're extremely confident in our cybersecurity posture, how do you know that? What's giving you this level of confidence? You're not doing cybersecurity control reviews. You're not verifying that your controls are implemented in an ongoing defensively regular basis, but you're reporting to me on these vendor surveys that you're awesome, that you're super good to go. The numbers just don't match.
It's just so. All right, the best way to word this is the numbers aren't matching up because there never has been a time where anybody's called the bluff, right? They're just like, hey, I'm really confident that, yeah, for reputational, yeah, we're doing good. And constantly behind their back, they're like, God, I hope something doesn't happen. God, I hope that I'm not found out. God, I hope I'm not put under charges for spillage of data, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, or whatever. And so, like, it's just secretly skating by, but sweating on the back end, right? It's that picture
And,
where the guy's
and
all
it's,
tight and tucked
yeah.
in the front, and then the back, it's all clothespins holding all the fat together like Homer Simpson, right? Like, it's just...
Well, and there's some market dynamics here, right? Because if you honestly told your prime suppliers, I have zero confidence in our cybersecurity posture, that might cost you some business.
Absolutely.
Which you're not going to do, right? You're going to rate yourself probably higher than your actual posture. Totally understandable. But when we dig into the numbers here and it turns out that you're not doing those things, then we have a perfect justification for having external verification. One of the things that's interesting to me here, companies rate themselves as being extremely confident in their cybersecurity, and they're like, yeah, we're doing all the things we're supposed to do. And then you say, okay, well, can we come in and just check your work? And they go, whoa, way too big of a burden. And you're like, well, if you're already doing them and you're super confident in your level of implementation, what's the big deal? If there's nothing to hide, then why are we so worried about someone coming in and checking your work? Because you said with very high scores that you're very confident. And we all know what's happening here, right? Like we all know what's happening here. And I think that the MXD report does a really good job of explaining it.
Do you notice that the lower confidence numbers have to do with the things that have like I guess from my perspective, more time and effort needed to develop or things to do,
Yeah.
lower confidence numbers and things like reviewing and auditing controls and, continuous monitoring basics, or developing policies and procedures or documentation and governance and things like that to govern the cybersecurity program. Things that not only take specialized skills, but specialized time, right, that are associated with it. And that's where there's actually the hugest deficiencies in these reports. But then you look at number 10, and I won't steal your thunder, so I'll let you read it off. And
Yeah,
then
number 10 is a huge anomaly to me because number 10, they say cybersecurity training simulations or tabletop exercises are conducted at least annually, and 98% of DIB companies said, yeah, we do that. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that for a second. I don't know I don't know if maybe it was an interpretation of what they meant by training. Maybe this is a double dip on are you doing training for cybersecurity? But I definitely do not believe that almost 98% of companies in the DIB are doing a tabletop cybersecurity exercise
or
every
any
single day.
training simulation, period.
Yeah,
Unless it's like are they counting O365 simulated fish attempts and things like that?
yeah.
Like, you know, like
I don't believe that, but it is an interesting number. Feel free to dig into the numbers at home. There's a lot of details to dig into. And here's a couple of details that jumped out to us later on in the report outside of the summary tables. So here's one that I found very interesting. The likelihood that your customers would terminate a contract due to a cybersecurity concern. So for DIB companies, your customer are prime contractors, are the DoD. And DIB respondents said it is a 48% likelihood that our customers would terminate a contract if they had a concern with our cybersecurity. That is simultaneously a big number and not a big number. So imagine if you're not doing anything for cybersecurity and you just flip a coin, right? It's almost a 50-50 chance here that your customer, if they found out that you weren't doing cybersecurity, would just straight up terminate your contract.
wait, so they asked these people, do you think that your customer would terminate your contract if your cybersecurity is jacked up? And they're like,
Yeah.
nah. 52% of them said nah.
52%. Now, this is an interesting thing, right? This
375, right? 750 respondents to this survey, right? So
well, this is among the companies that specifically say we do defense weapon system work, right? Of the subset of companies. So this is very interesting because if you were to go to a company and you were to say it is literally a 50-50 chance that if your customers find out that you're this jacked up, they're going to terminate your contract. That's a big number. Looking at DoD, big picture, the fact that there's only a 50-50 chance that you would terminate their contract when we're talking this big game about CMMC as a condition of contract award. If you don't have the cert, you're not getting the work. That means I did not realize that rhymed so well. If you don't have the cert, you don't get the work. We got to dust it, write that down. So the fact that only 50% of people think that this is a possibility that their contract would be terminated means that DoD is not communicating the importance of this problem to the DIB sufficiently. The fact that there's a 50-50 chance means I don't think a lot of companies in the DIB understand how likely it could be.
So is it that, or is it we've always talked about they're really not going to take it seriously until somebody gets hit in the face?
Yeah. And why would
they? It's not real. I don't think ghosts are real until I see one, right? Like, and so right now, this is the cybersecurity ghost that's coming to haunt my contracts past. And realistically, until I see you pop up and go boo, I don't believe he exists.
Yep. And on that point, they go on.
Everybody was afraid of Casper until they knew how friendly he was. Just saying that, just putting it out there.
And they go on,
how do you concentrate on the show with me? How do you do it?
Based on that point, to extend that point that you just made in a different chapter, in chapter 3 of the report, they talk about barriers to cybersecurity preparedness. What's keeping companies from implementing these things? And they have a section on leadership support. I was just on the CUI Center of Excellence Discord this morning. You can go on the subreddit for CMMC. Every week, there are multiple people posting on there, pleading with users to say, how do I convince my leadership to take this seriously? Mm-hmm. How do I convince anybody to spend any money on this whatsoever? I'm constantly getting stonewalled by leadership. I mean, it's every other day that you see a new thread on this. So under barriers to cyber preparedness in this report, they talk about leadership support. And the excerpt here says modest priority levels of leadership support suggests a potential disconnect between the urgency of cyber threats and the prioritization at the leadership level, underlining the need for more compelling advocacy for robust cybersecurity investments. That is the most diplomatic thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Leadership doesn't believe in it. They don't think it's a priority, so they're not doing it. You can see this every day online from LinkedIn, the subreddit, the Discord, talking to the people who are in the IT and security teams. They're getting modest prioritization from leadership. And this report says the same thing. They're not prioritizing it because there's really only a 50-50 chance that your customers are going to care about it. Now, you might think that's a really big number, but you know, you want to flip a coin and not spend the money. So that doesn't seem like something that's going to be fixed organically. You're going to
How
have a forcing function that changes
how
that position.
how with all the FCA cases, with all of the documentation, with all the hot aired podcast hosts that come on and tell you exactly what's going to happen if you do not fulfill CMMC for your contracts, with all of that takes place, every single piece of literature, plus national cybersecurity strategies that say that we are trying to implement things like this, and different pieces of regulatory documentation that goes through reviews and signatory processes and things like that say it's going to happen. How can you still, in your right mind, be one of the 52% that say, I don't think anything's going to happen to me?
Well,
Unless it's that argument that says that you can't get rid of us all.
Well, there's some of that, but also what we've seen going to big events and stuff like that and talking to contractors is the biggest influence on their perspective is what their customers tell them. And so if your particular purchaser from Lockheed or Northrop or whoever, or your particular PM from whatever particular program management office in the DoD hasn't gotten the memo, doesn't know what's going on or whatever, and they're saying, I need these things right now. I need you to do them right now. Like there's a shortage. I need these missile fins right now. And then you go, what about CMMC? And they go, that's still in rulemaking. Give me the fins, right? What are you going to do? Right? You're going to make the fins. And then if somebody's like, how's your cybersecurity, by the way? They go, we're good, bro. We're good. We're just going to make these fins for you. They're like, okay, cool. Sweet. See you next month.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so there's other factors in the environment. It isn't just people misleading or misrepresenting their posture. There's a lot of behavioral things that are influencing their answers, but there is a discrepancy between their confidence level and what they represent and what they're actually doing, regardless of the reason why that's happening. We're not trying to demonize anybody here, but there's an obvious disparity in the numbers. So let's talk about some of the details here, because for each of those summary percentages that we talked about earlier, they go into the details and have some excerpts for each one of them. We're not going to get into all of them. Definitely read the report, but the system security plan numbers are absolutely crazy. So the question was, system security plans are in place for critical IT systems. For DIB respondents, DIB contractors, 3% said they just straight up don't have one. 64% of companies said they only have them for some systems. And 33% said they had an SSP that covers all systems. So only 30% of DIB companies have a comprehensive plan for the security of their environment. That is right in line with the numbers that we've seen for the last 10 years. For the last 10 years, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in terms of the threat of CMMC. People on podcasts talking about rulemaking and, it's coming in the future. DIBCAT getting up there and talking about it. There obviously has not been enough consequence in the environment for that number to change. Okay, talking about comprehensiveness of incident response plans for DIB contractors, 34% said they had a basic incident response plan. And honestly, that's probably fine, right? The incident response plan requirement in 171, even the incident response plan in 853 is not that insane. It's not that intense. 50%, 49% said they had a moderately comprehensive incident response plan. Only 16% said they have an extensive and detailed plan for dealing with an incident. DoD might have an issue with those numbers. Honestly, I think they're pretty good. I'm happy that, even a basic plan at all, they don't have a number for how many companies don't have one, which I would like to see. But of this set of companies that responded, apparently a lot of them have thought about their incident response plan, which is extremely important.
16% have extensive and detailed plans. 98% execute tabletop exercises annually.
Yeah, and on the list of things that I straight up do not believe, this is probably the biggest one. Time to detect and contain a cyber attack. For DIB companies, 23% of companies think that they will be able to detect and contain a cyber attack within hours. 32% think that they'll be able to detect it within days. 30% within weeks. Only 14% of DIB respondents think that it would take them longer than weeks to detect a cybersecurity incident, which I think flies in the face of every single cybersecurity report ever written. The one that jumps to my mind is the annual Verizon DBIR report that says average dwell time of bad guys inside networks is usually like a year or more. Detecting within hours, 1 in 4 companies in the DIB detecting cybersecurity incidents, that's straight up not true. That is maybe one of the most glaring numbers about just delusional overconfidence in cybersecurity posture in the whole report.
Listen, Jacob. Listen. Even though CISA just spent multiple weeks inside of a federal executive civilian branch organization doing some activities, nefarious activities that they probably should have been detected on, and they spent weeks doing it. The average manufacturer in the DIB is saying that within hours, 23%,
Within
25%
hours,
of it,
less than a
25%
day,
of,
less
and
than a day.
realistically, 50% of them are saying within a day.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is they were talking about the size of cybersecurity teams within these companies, and the vast majority of companies have 1 to 5 people. So somehow,
Now,
with a team of 1 to 5 people, you'll be able to detect an incident before the shifts turn over on your 24-hour SOC that apparently everybody has.
so not to be completely bashing the numbers and killing it, we don't know exactly what the scenario is with that 25%. There's 25% could be well set up and well. Yeah, I'm fairly confident in this because I'm rocking vigilance or whatever. Shameful plug, whatever it may be, right? But still, do you get what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's
It just, so maybe it's true. Maybe
it
it's
is
true.
circumstantial numbers. What's not circumstantial is 98% are not doing tabletop exercise. I don't care what you say.
I just think that if 1 in 4 companies in the DIB are able to detect incidents within hours, then the people who are at those companies, listen to me, you need to leave your job and become a consultant, because there are a lot of major global corporations with basically unlimited cybersecurity budgets that can't do what you're reporting to do. And you could make a ton of money teaching everybody else in the security world how you're doing that, because no one else is apparently able to do what you're claiming you're able to do. Here's an interesting one. Under business risk assessments, they asked organizations how many, the organization has conducted a cybersecurity risk assessment in the last 12 months. Within the last year, have you conducted a cybersecurity risk assessment? Only 58% of the DIB has done that. Only 58% of the DIB. So when we get into specific requirements pursuant to DFARS, CMMC 800-171, we start to see a weird pattern where only about 50% of companies are actually watching these things, doing annual evaluations, actually evaluating themselves against the controls, which in the grand scheme of things, with all the smoke and noise around CMMC and obligations, is still a very low number. There's basically flip a coin and a company hasn't done any of their evaluations against these requirements. They ask, how closely are organizations monitoring for new or updated cybersecurity laws and regulations? According to the DIB, 19% are not following it closely at all. 20% of the DIB just isn't following along with the regulations whatsoever. Only 48% are following moderately closely. And here's this magnificent 33% again. Only about 33% are closely following what is going on, which anecdotally, in our experience, based off of talking to a ton of people over the last several years, talking to a ton of people every week, that's about right. That feels about right.
Yeah, well, there's some that we talk to that are like, yeah, every week you guys come out and you tell us this is what I need to know. I keep track with what you're going on. I follow this source, not just you. I follow that source, that source, that source. And then some people are like, I have no clue what you're talking about.
Yep. And you might
these
say,
are at the same shows that have the same industry, that have the same target audience, that have the same cybersecurity requirements. We don't just go to shows. Well, not every show that we go to is CMMC specific, but you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
A majority of the time when we go and talk to OSA focused cybersecurity OSA personnel at CMMC focused events. I'll learn how to talk one day. Okay. I don't know how, but when we go and talk to that specific personnel in that specific industry, the conversations are night and day. 50% of the people are like, I follow this to a T, and this is what helps me, stay up to date. And some people are like, and I'm not just talking about our show. I'm talking about in general CMMC.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah. The fact that you would go to an event where companies It isn't just that it has to be a cybersecurity or a compliance oriented event. You go to just an acquisition event where the companies who are attending, their entire business is working for the DoD or their primes, and they go, what's DFARS? What's CMMC? And you're like, man, we got a serious problem. And just to wrap up this episode with these numbers from the report, the one that is probably the most obvious and also still the most depressing: organizations performed internal cybersecurity audits against the following compliance standards in the past 12 months. Remember, 81% of DIB companies rate themselves as highly confident in their cybersecurity posture, and yet only 54% of DIB companies have evaluated themselves against 800-171 in the last year. Only 53% of them have evaluated themselves against CMMC in the last year, and only 58% of them have thought about their obligations under DFARS in the last year, and yet 81% of them say we're good to go, right? That's basically the ultimate summary right there. There's a ton of details from a ton of different questions broken down by DIB, aerospace, defense, small, large. They go into, I mean, it's a great report. I think it's like 30, 50 pages, something like that. But ultimately, it's just another piece of evidence in a long line of very similar reports that show companies self-attesting to compliance with their requirements is not a reliable means of gaining assurance. And to this day, on the eve of the CMMC final rule, we have massive levels of overconfidence from self-reported responses from a significant number of companies who only do DoD work. And this is why CMMC is a thing. This is it right here.
I feel like that this vertical itself is one that is where the CMMC requirements would be the freshest. The cybersecurity would be the freshest. The renaissance of cyber hygiene would hit this vertical of the industry the hardest, right? And instead, we look at the report and they're like, "Nah, man, we're good. We've known about the renaissance forever."
And to be fair, these numbers are not good, right? These numbers are not good. These are rookie numbers. They need to be we need to get those numbers up. However, they compare and contrast with the chemical sector and with other critical manufacturing sectors, and they're even worse. So although we beat up on the DIB and say, hey, you got to get ahead of this because clearly your customers care about it, they are doing well on balance with other sectors, but that doesn't mean that you're killing it. That doesn't mean that you're knocking it out of the park, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be good enough for customers. I mean, it's a 50-50 chance that your customers are going to terminate your contract, as reported by, not by the customers, but by people's perceptions of their customers. That's a crazy number.
Yes, it is a crazy number.
That's an insane number.
That was a hard pause right there. I didn't know if you had something else that was floating or what was going on. But yes, it is an insane number. But I just feel like you say that from the perspective of we want this thing to get done. We want things to get a non-zero number, right? If you will, right? Yeah. But we want this thing to get done because we want national security to improve, right? And that's why we say these numbers are subpar. But when we look, it's getting better. When we see reports now, the numbers are improving, but it is nowhere near. I mean, if we thought we started this in 2016, 2015, and you're still sitting at, in 2022, we were sitting at 22% of validated implementations. And now we're just talking about confidence. But I'm going to tell you, I don't have to see the end results of this. I know what it is. I know the massacre that happens when we come in and validate it, because there's not the competency and skills to inherit it. I'm not being tough on you, the industry. I'm not being tough on these people just to be tough on them. It is a tough pill that they've been handed. But the fact of the matter is that these numbers, they're still putrid.
I mean,
I can't even make it. I can't even justify it. Dude.
They're the reason why CMMC is a thing. They're the reason why CMMC is a thing. And right here on the eve of the rule, the numbers are exactly the same as they've always been. And thanks to MXD, they sort of pulled out the details and they said people are just overrepresenting their cybersecurity, which is exactly what happened with the blow up in 2017 through 2019, which is exactly why you need external verification. It's just another example, more evidence, more numbers that aren't coming from the DoD. These are responses from DIB contractors themselves. It's a good report. You should check it out. It's definitely something that we're going to reference many times in the future, but it's worth your time to read.
50% of the people said DFARS, never heard of her. 98% of the people, tabletop exercises, faux show.
Yeah. Yeah.
See you later.
Spidey sense not lining up. But anyways, check out the report, do your homework. Everybody's got some reading, and then we'll see you next week.
See you next week, folks.
All right, folks, it's August on the Summit Up podcast. Jason, I have a question for you. Which one of these two things is more believable? That the federal government would admit the existence of non